Welcome to Why I Quit, a show that covers real people quitting their 9-to-5 jobs in search of something different. Listen to inspiring conversations where we dive deep into the stories of why people quit their jobs, what were the hardest parts, where are they now, and any advice for people following the same path. I am so excited to introduce Lia James as this week's guest on Why I Quit. Listen to Lia share her journey of quitting corporate jobs multiple times to start different companies over the years. Learn how she drove around the country in a van with a dinner table to bring strangers together and engage in more meaningful conversation. Get inspired hearing about how she is currently turning her home into a space for people to gather, reset, and connect in more meaningful ways. Hey, Lia, thanks so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about your story. Do you mind going back and telling me a little bit about where you're from and your education background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Lia James. I run a business called And Human. We've been in business since about 2017, but I come from a communications education background. I went to ECU in Richmond, Virginia. Took me through a really interesting path during the good recession of 2008, 2009, which was the real education in all honesty. And that's really what built the rest of my career, my business. It's like I think most people say they kind of fell into what they do. I definitely did. I was like forced into it because there were no jobs. But the series of like workforce development and really being curious about how people were marketing themselves for jobs that didn't pay anything during that time. Like I say, that's like my real education because I got really curious in how people were taking marketing tactics to apply them to like personal branding. Between that and my job that I finally did get, I think that really like propped me up for my future. So I lean on that a lot as like that was my real education and my career builder.
Perfect. And I guess where was your mindset at, as you were, initially applying for jobs? Did you have like a career path trajectory that you expected? And, what did that look like versus what it actually turned out?
Funny enough, my very first thought was that I was going to be an interior architect. So I originally went to school for interior architecture, eventually evolved into switching and moving to communications and public relations for a host of reasons that maybe is a completely different conversation. But when I was leaving college, I remember I had two professors who forced us to learn social media. I was like anti-social media at that point, which is interesting. But the best things that I could have ever learned was how to network both on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And I thought that those would serve me in building an event production company. I ended up going into workforce development. Now, I use all of those things, like everything that I learned definitely has played a role in how I show up in business and how I show up in helping people build their businesses, their careers, and really finding alignment within what they do every day. But I am not in event production, that is for sure.
Nice. And tell me a little bit about that kind of first role that you went into. What were some like good experiences you had with it, and then how did that kind of like progress as you continue down your career?
Well, I have three different jobs that I say are my first experience. So let me tell that really quickly. So I got my first career job 6 months out of college in a recession. And it was terrible, like terrible. I lasted 6 months. I quit. I remember my dad called me and said, absolutely not. You go back to that job and you get that job back because you're in a recession. You need money. And I said, no, I'm going to go work at a wine shop. I never worked retail a day in my life. And here I am as like a recent grad, and I'm going to go work at this wine shop. And it turned out to be one of the best jobs I ever have had, ever. It really enhanced my like creative use of problem solving, curiosity, and like people, and really understanding human dynamics. Well, at the same time, that really wasn't paying the bills. So I did end up getting a full-time job working in a workforce development center for a community college in Virginia. And those two together are what laid the foundation for everything that came after. I happened to get a boss who was just a really courageous human who worked really hard. She did protests in the 60s. Like she was just phenomenal. And She knew that I was being severely underpaid. And I don't know what she saw in me as a 24-ish person. I don't know how old I was at the time. And she taught me how to run my own business. So she basically allowed me to, one, teach thought leadership through social media at the Workforce Development Center, and also use it as a lead generation for me to then do consulting as a 24-year-old. And I, at the time, thought, I will just offer it for free. I just want everyone to have this education for free. Everybody should like just have access. And she was like, absolutely not. You should get paid for your brain. Let me show you how. And I really do still to this day, like look back on her as a leader and her as a boss. She could have taken a cut of every single client I got, and she didn't. She could have fired me for like doing two things at once and like double dipping. She didn't. She really did empower me. And that was the start of my very first business. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no business being an entrepreneur at that point in my life, but it's really how I made ends meet between that business, between working for her full time, and then also working at the wine shop in the evenings to be playful and creative and be exposed to a lot of different people. So my very first experience, like most people who graduated during the recession, was really a culmination of several things, not just one.
I'm curious in terms of, being able to balance all those things. I know like a lot of our listeners kind of talk a lot about, when's the right time to quit, versus have a side hustle and build that up. You know, it seemed like you loved all of these jobs that you had. Was it too much? Was there any burnout from doing all those at once? And then, kind of how did you think about, eventually kind of transitioning into like fully, running your own business?
That is a great question. And I would say my answer from that age is very different from my answer now at like mid to late 30s now. Yeah, I would say my answers are very different. So back then, I was, yes, very eager to leave my full time job because I found so much more enjoyment out of consulting and playing and getting paid to play, basically. I wasn't getting paid a lot, but it felt like a lot. And I remember we had this consultant that would come in and work with us on team dynamics because we worked in three different locations at my full time job. And back then, the technology wasn't great. So, how could we make one team environment with three different locations? And I would say working with her was really interesting, considering now I work with people in a lot of different distributed environments. But she told me, I asked her, I was like, how do I do what you do? How do I quit my job and just work for myself? It's such a dream. And she said, you, in the short term, you hustle. You get up early, you stay up late, you work whenever you have free time. And when your work outside of work is outpacing the work that you're doing inside of work, that's when you start to look at how do you leave. And you don't leave until you have some sort of security. And I thought she was crazy and I did not listen to a word that she said. And let me tell you, I left long before I was ready. Her advice was really helpful though, because it did play a role, I think, in my dedication to what I was doing outside and my ability to actually like think about leaving and what did I need to leave. And I had someone to look up to. But now, as a late 30 person, I don't know that I would do that in the same way. One, I had a different level of energy and curiosity and hustle, and like I could go out still at night and like wake up really early and do the thing. I don't know that I did it well, but I thought I did. And I just don't have that same like want and drive. Like I have different things in my life that I want to do that I wouldn't do a full time side hustle, two side hustles at that, and then think that I would have this like full life. Yeah, I just think it serves different purposes. So I think people have to really evaluate what chapter they're in and what works for their needs in that specific chapter. And it's okay if it looks different. It's okay if you're in a hustle place and you can do that. And it's okay if you're not and you can't do that and you have to take a slower path to build up something on the side or to leave or whatever the case may be. But really it's going to be dependent on where you are in your life stage.
Talk to me a little bit about the path to going from, side hustles to, eventually, kind of starting and running your own business. How did you think about, what you needed to do to get to the point where you could leave a full-time job? Was it, Was it money? Was it, a specific moment? How did you, progress to get to that point?
Well, so I've started two different businesses and I've left corporate two different times. So the first time, I would say I had a lot less responsibility. Yes, I paid my own bills. Yes, I lived on my own. I did have roommates, but I lived on my own. But my bills were really low. I had low expectations of what I needed in my life. So I could run a lot leaner. And the second time around, I was, I think I just turned like 30. I was between 30 and 31, and I had a lot more responsibility and I had higher bills. And that transition was a lot different than the first one. So the first one, I had wide eyes and I just felt like I could do anything I wanted and I was invincible and, nothing was going to hurt me because worst case scenario, I just go get another job. Second time around, there was a lot more at stake and I was a little more timid to leave. I'd been back in corporate for about 3 years at that point. And honestly, I was burnt out. And that's what led to me leaving. That wasn't originally the goal. Like, I was in this place where I didn't know what I would do next. So I had spent 3 years being a career coach. I worked for two different tech boot camps, building out their career programs, writing the curriculum, overseeing the program in collaboration with a partnership manager. And then the second one, I shifted and I was more on the partnership side than the curriculum development side. But in those 3 years, I worked with over 1,000 career changers. And that's a lot of people, a lot of like life things that you deal with other people. And I was emotionally at my capacity or over my capacity. I wasn't making great decisions. I wasn't really being able to tap into my emotional intelligence because I was just spent. And I was helping other people do the things that I really needed to do for myself. I was helping people make these like really important transitions to do things they cared about, to help them discover what they should be doing in their life. And I wasn't taking my own advice. And when you hit the end of that and you're so burnt out, you can't really make logical decisions, right? Like you're in a place where at the time for me, everything just looked impossible and I didn't see a path forward. Like, what do you become after you're an overpaid career coach? Like, that sounds so horrible, but that's how I felt. And I did think I was a valuable person, but you don't just go become another career coach somewhere else if you're that burnt out. So I think mine came out of necessity, survival. And when I left, I don't think I was really ready. I think I was more ready the first time, even though I was like young and so like naive and had no money to do it. The second time I did it, I had one client lined up and I had honestly about a month of runway. I don't recommend those things. Like, that is not how I coach other people to do it. But what I'll say is it did make me work really hard to like, one, trust myself, trust my community, and figure it out. Like, I didn't have a backup plan. I had bills to pay. So I had a few different things I did to prepare for it. And the reason I got there, and I think this is really important to share because there are so many different pieces of advice on how to handle it and how to make that pivot happen successfully. And the reality is like life happens and sometimes that pivot doesn't happen successfully or it doesn't happen the way that you want it to happen. So 2 months before I left, I was coming home from work like crying every day. It was really bad. And I remember one of my girlfriends said to me, she said, "What would happen if you got fired tomorrow?" I was like, I can't afford it. This can't happen. I'm like living like right at my like paycheck. And I live in an expensive city. Like I can't. She was like, "Doesn't matter if you can't. What would you do?" So it forced me to really like get the ball rolling and figure it out. Doesn't mean had enough time to get it really as far along as I should have, but I couldn't last any longer. So what I did was I eliminated basically every expense I could, which is not always the right route either. I tell people make more money, don't cut all your expenses, but that was my only option at that point. So I switched to Google Fi, which was like the cheapest phone bill at the time that you could get. Still love it. Great plan. Not great for me right now, but it was great. Least I've ever paid on a phone ever. I rented my house out on Airbnb so that when I could go stay with friends or if I was traveling, that I could have that being rented. It did pay for my rent, and I did get it approved by my landlord. I traded my landlord work on my house for rent when I didn't have like someone coming through. So like she trusted me to put people in the house because I invested so much in our house. So there were things like that that I did to try to offset my costs of living in order to be able to afford the lifestyle that I had at that point, because it was so much more expensive than it was the first time I quit. But it worked out. Like it really worked out. I've had my business since. It was a really hard first year, but like each contract kept getting extended. And I think it was the second or third client that I had that became a client for 5 years after that. That was a really long answer, but there were a lot of pieces there.
No, that's perfect. I love the way that you went through it, and definitely a lot I want to unpack there. But I'd love to start out like something that I think is like super interesting with your journey is how, you quit to start your own business, then went back to corporate, and then quit again. I think like something that people talk a lot about is they're always like looking so like long term, thinking of like, oh, I need to find my passion or the business that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But
Mm.
you have like followed different trajectories and pivoted a bunch. So like, talk to me a little bit about how that experience was for you, and especially with your career coaching, like what you see with other people, like kind of doing similar
Yeah.
things as well.
Yeah, I would say that some people don't plan to go back. They think they have to like start a business and it has to be the next unicorn and that has to be forever. And the reality is like we as humans, we grow, we change, our interests change. Like the world of work right now, it's rare that the thing that you start tomorrow is going to be the forever. It happens, but it doesn't mean it has to happen that way. For me, going back to work, it really catapulted my career significantly. And it was the most strategic move I could have ever made. So when I moved to Chicago, I really thought I'd just pick up more clients doing thought leadership. But the reality was, I was very underdeveloped. I'd only worked internally for one and a half organizations, right? That one company that I worked for 6 months and was miserable. And then the workforce development organization, which is a state organization. And even though I got a ton of experience because I had exposure to tons of businesses, my development as a coworker, as an employee, as a leader was incredibly self like led in a lot of ways and like just underdeveloped. So I can't imagine me ever running a company with that little bit of education. So being brought into the first boot camp, the first tech boot camp that I was brought into, I had never worked with people my own age. I had never worked in a high like net worth industry. Like I had never really been exposed to money like that. Yeah, it was incredibly eye opening. It put me in touch with tech leaders that like I could have only dreamt of at the time. But that network and my ability to network was everything. And like it's I encourage people to go back into the workforce in that capacity when it's going to strategically support some development that they have. And there should be no ego tied to I sunset my business or I stepped away from my business to go do this other thing. It's all one big learning lesson. Like think about it as if you're going to college or trade school or anything like that. It's just another form of investing in yourself. But because we often tie our egos to our work, it's really hard to do that because it feels like failure. And I've seen people do both ways. I have a kind of like a co-mentorship relationship right now with a woman who is much further along in her career than I am. I think she's in her 50s. And I met her because she was actually going to hire me for a project. And then I just like fell in love with her. And I was like, I need you in my life. And I reached out to her and I was like, would you be open to like a mentorship situation? She was like, actually, I want to learn from you too. So we had like this like co whatever. But I bring her up because she ran a PR agency for years. And when her kids were in high school, I think it was getting ready for college, she went back into the workforce. She also, like, I think at that time went through a divorce. So becoming a single mom for older kids that were going to cost her more money, she went back to the workforce. So I share that to say, like, there are different reasons for different decisions that you need to make. And in coaching people or just being exposed to other people, remembering that, like, no two paths are the same and trying to, like, let ego go when you're making a decision that's right for your personal development and journey.
No, that's such a good way to put it. And I'd love to dive into, now that you've done it twice with starting a business. I think something we talk about all the time on this show is the expectations versus reality of the first year of starting a business. How, I think everyone has the assumptions of what they think they can do, and then the reality of how hard it actually is. So I'd love to hear, kind of your experience. Obviously, you've done it twice. You can focus on one or the other or both. Kind of what was your experience in terms of like your confidence level going in, what the first year was like, and kind of what you learned from it.
I'll talk about the second time because I think it's the most relevant. So, my first year was challenging, exciting, and like really just this like sprint forward to just survive. Because again, you have to remember, I didn't really prepare for it. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do or offer. So for me, it was a lot of learning and it was a lot of observing and trying to figure out where could I make money doing what skills were valuable. In my mind, I remember I texted my dad. I was somewhere for a conference that I volunteered for so that I could go. I was in San Francisco and I remember sitting on the BART and I text my dad and I said, I know what I'm going to do and I know how all of this is going to work because I'm a multi passionate person. So I need to do multiple things. I'm going to spend a third of my time consulting. I'm going to spend a third of my time building out this coaching program that I know has been so successful in my past. And now I'm going to own it. And then 30% of my time, I'm going to build furniture and make a lot of money doing it. Like what? And then what was I going to do with like the other 10%? Live. I was gonna live like this wild life. I don't know. But like I think about that. I just have it screenshot somewhere because I think about it all the time. And I think it's so hilarious that I thought that in the first year, like I wrote out how much I was going to make from each one and how this was going to make me so much money that I could just do whatever I wanted. No, that's not how it worked at all. Now, I did do all of those things, but not in that way, not in that structured way. Woodworking is what's kept me sane, right? It's like made me play and explore and create in ways that my brain doesn't get to create when I coach and consult. But like, never is my time that balanced. Never. And it's different every year how much time I get to do these things. And honestly, I've not made like really any money on my woodworking because I've never tried. Like it just became a hobby and playful and really enjoyable for me. Yeah, my first year was interesting. My first year was super ambitious and very like, again, more experienced but still naive in what was possible. I never built the coaching program. I coach people. I have always coached people and I take people through my curriculum, but there's nowhere where you can go online and log in and take my program. I own the curriculum. I could copyright it. I could sell it. I could license it. And I've never prioritized it. It's just not been where my business actually went. Most of my business comes from consulting, right? Like it's I love it. I get to problem solve, work with different teams, different leaders. I get really challenged in different ways. It's higher paying. Um, but it took a year of a lot of mistakes to figure that out and to like really know that I couldn't do it all, that you either do in phases and you build. You got to look long term, not short term. And it's okay if you make some mistakes along the way.
You mentioned priorities from the work side. I'm also curious of how you think about like prioritizing your time in terms of like work and life together. So, obviously you have a full-time business, but you have like different angles with it. How do you think about like prioritizing your time between the different businesses, the thing that's important to you, whether it's like flexibility, money, different things, as well as kind of like the personal life side as well. How do you think about balancing those things, and has that changed over time?
It's definitely changed over time. I've always had this theory that I think work and life should be more integrated, not in the way that you work all the time kind of integration, not where your work is your life kind of integration, but in that work really should work around your life. Like you should live first and then like build something that allows you to do that. And I think what I have done mostly does that. There are times where that's in conflict. There are times where I don't have that balance. Um, and I would say every season requires something different from me. So, for example, in 2020, I had a traumatic eye surgery. I had muscle damage, couldn't see out of my eye for several months, and had to relearn how to process information and how to work in the way that I had always worked. And I always say I'm a workaholic, but I did really live while I was working, traveled the world, saw friends, did really fun things, had a really cool life. That surgery changed everything for me. I can't work the way that I used to. I can't push through when I'm tired. I can't put my health on the back burner or doctor's appointments on the back burner. Like I have to prioritize my life first. So in 2021, I think it was April of 2021, I walked away from everything that I've built my whole adult life. I walked away from, and I said I wasn't going to do anything anymore. I couldn't because my health could, like, I pushed through after my surgery and it just was not the right move. So I walked away and I took 6 months off and I helped my mom build her house that she just bought. She bought and we gutted and renovated it. I packed up a slab of wood that was a tabletop, a 8 foot long table, raw wood that was not done. I packed it up in a trailer with my woodworking tools and I left Baltimore and just drove around the country. I had no real plan other than I needed to prove to myself that I could still do some of my life things. And I did stuff for myself. Had nothing to do with work. I didn't work for 6 months. And then at 6 months, I was like, I should probably work again because I kind of need money. I'm not wealthy in like the independent wealth kind of way, but I had savings that allowed me to do that. So started working again. I worked for 6 months, and then I came back to Baltimore. I bought a home, and one of my projects ended in August of 2022. That was like my main project at the time, and I decided to take another 6 months. So 2 years in a row, I worked half a year and didn't work the other half of the year. And those are really risky moves when you run your own business, but they were also moves I had to make for my own like health. Without those moves, I don't think I could operate right now. Now, the last year has not looked like that. The last year has been a lot of work to catch up for taking off 2 years back to back, 6 months at a time. It's been a lot of rebuilding my network, rebuilding my pipeline, heavy on the work side, not so heavy on the other side. I've rebuilt my company in a very like human-centric way. So I have these new areas within my business that I didn't have before, which requires a lot more work and financial investment. I give all of those examples for people to know that like not every year do you have the same balance that you had the year before, and it's okay if that looks different, and everyone's journey is slightly different and you have to make choices that are right for you. But for me, my health had to come first, and I had to find a different way to make money to provide for myself because again, I'm not married. I don't have a financial partner. I have made all of my financial like support for myself, and so what when it runs out, it runs out. And so it's up to me to like figure out what's possible. And there's no way in this world that I could operate in a way that like I couldn't work, right? Like that's not an option for me. So I had to take the hard choice to take a little bit of a financial hit to be able to move forward.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I'd be curious in terms of, the 6 months away, in terms of did that change your frame of reference about like work in the company itself? I know like sometimes it's like really hard to have the time and space when you're, you know, full-time job, you feel like you don't have, really like a chance. Like your brain almost doesn't have a capacity to, like kind of think through other options. Were you able to figure out like different things about yourself and your business during that time off that you think was valuable?
Yes, it fundamentally changed the way that I did business. So I think before, if I'm really honest, I probably ran more of a freelancing style business than I did an actual business. Not that freelancing isn't an actual business, but it's just a different model structure and how you operate. I did have subcontractors at times, but mostly I would say I probably ran more like a freelancer than I did anything else. And that was still consulting and coaching at a high level, but there wasn't a real like model there. When I had the first set of time away, I had some like realizations and epiphanies that actually reaffirmed some of the things I started in the very beginning of building business, which was really like leading with people first, understanding that in order for people to be good in their jobs or their businesses or in their careers, they also have to have all these other parts of their life too. And so you have to look at it from a holistic lens. It allowed me to not be so afraid of that. I think I definitely like hid a lot of those pieces of me in order to fit in with business and have a seat at the table. Where when I put that at the forefront of my business, it actually allowed me to get better business. It allowed me to do business better. It allowed me to get higher paying clients. And it also provided me the space too to like, how do I design something that actually brings me joy as much as possible? Business is always going to be work and there's always going to be tough times, but how do I design a model that I can touch all parts of who I am and have the impact that I want to have in my business as well? Also, as the inspiration behind one of my, my new parts of my business, which is the Traveling Table Dinner Series, where I bring strangers together for meaningful conversation and connection. It's allowed me to like reframe in more of a social enterprise model than, a traditional like one to one, I sell something, you pay me for it. How do I create a more of an ecosystem? It's brought in the concept of like spaces and experiences. So the dinner series is part of the experience. The home I bought will be part of the spaces. Again, as an extension of the coaching and consulting I do, I see that there's a lot of like human dynamics that block people from doing really good business. And if I can help people experience space in a different way and shift their minds in the way that they create, innovate, or work, then I've done my job even better than I was doing just by consulting. So the space that I bought right now, it's my main home, but eventually it will be a shared space for people to come and get a reset. I'm really pushing the elements of design in the home, colors, and using the space a little bit differently so that people can engage with it, slow down to like observe and touch and feel and use all of their senses. And the hope is that helps them reframe either their work or the business they're starting or the team that they're working on or something else in their life. But I do believe our space impacts us a lot. So they're all extensions of how I coach and consult people. But I don't think I would have gotten there if I was just plowing ahead. I think I was just trying to figure out how I fit into the world as opposed to like looking at the part of my world that really needs to exist.
No, that's great. And I think that's a kind of perfect transition into the last question I ask every guest is tied around what are you most excited about in terms of it could be business, it could be personal. We try to frame it in like a 3 to 5 years, so not too short term, but not too long term. But what gets you most excited as you're like thinking about what's next?
I think what gets me the most excited and has continued to get me the most excited throughout my career is helping people really live fully. That sounds so funny because I help people do their jobs and build business. Yeah, I think what really gets me the most excited is helping them think about this like intersection of like skills and interests and abilities and how does that like maximize their life experience. We get one life. So like how do you not waste it? How do you do things that genuinely are like feeding your soul and have some sort of balance, but also they're not just like a means to an end. So the more I can continue to create those spaces and to challenge the way that we are told we have to work and challenge the ways that we're told we have to live, it's just the way we do it. I think that really makes me excited. I want to disrupt the system and I want to disrupt our mindsets around what work really is and what it can be.
Amazing. Well, would you mind kind of telling anyone about where to find you, where to contact you, and just where to follow like all the different things you have going on?
Yeah, happy to. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Lia James is spelled Lia, James, James. And you can also find me on Instagram, either under my name or the Traveling Table. It's the traveling underscore table, or on our website, andhuman.space. All of our programs are there, and anything that you might want to be connected to or follow. can all be found there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and I'm excited to see where you take it next.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We want to hear from you as we keep growing. Please reach out on whyquit.co if you have any feedback or potential guests. A special thanks to Chris Dole for the music. Please check out his newest album, Here's to You, on Spotify. Thank you, and we will be back next week with another episode.